Good afternoon. I'm Ben Flanagan with AL.com. In light of the news about Alabama's freshman basketball star Brandon Miller's involvement with the incident that saw former teammate Darius Miles charged with capital murder after the January 15th shooting death of 23-year-old mother Jamia Johnny Harris, we at AL.com want to bring you up to speed on all the facts that we've learned so far. And joining me to do that and to break down the details to answer some key questions are AL.com public safety reporter Carol Robinson and AL.com senior sports editor and SEC insider John Talty. Thanks, both of you, for being here. I know it's been a whirlwind. And I just want to note, just for context, on Tuesday, we learned that Brandon Miller brought the gun used in the killing of Harris that occurred near the Strip in Tuscaloosa and led to capital murder charges for Darius Miles and 20-year-old Michael Buzz Davis. This, according to law enforcement testimony on Tuesday. And Carol's story said that, according to police, Miles contacted Miller and asked him to bring the gun owned by Miles to where they were on the Strip. And we're going to get into that. But, John, I want to quickly start with you. Alabama has a game tonight. They travel to Columbia, where they're going to play South Carolina. And so far, we haven't had any indication that Brandon Miller won't play or travel with the team. But what is the latest that you can tell us about the situation?
Yeah, I mean, our full expectation is that Brandon is going to play tonight. You know, he has played throughout the situation. And I'm sure we'll get into this, but, you know, Alabama has been aware of Brandon's involvement for a while. And so they've certainly have been comfortable playing him to this point. I don't see any changes to that at this point. Certainly Alabama has given no indications that they're going to kind of move off of that perspective. So the expectation from everything we've been told is that he's going to travel to Columbia and he'll play tonight.
And Carol, you were in the courtroom on Tuesday to hear the testimony that came in the preliminary hearing and later broke the news of Brandon Miller's involvement in the incident. Right. What exactly did the testimony say that Miller did that night in Tuscaloosa?
Basically, Miller had dropped off Darius Miles and Jaden Bradley at a club in Tuscaloosa. The line was long. Miller did not want to stay, so he left. At some point later, after they all left the club, both the victims were at the club and Miles and Bradley. They went to a nearby, food place, the Quick Grill, to get something to eat. And it was there that an encounter took place. And it was said, in testimony that Davis was basically trying to get Jamia Harris's attention. There was some conflict with her boyfriend, Cedric Johnson, and Miles and Bradley walked away. And it was at that point, according to, testimony in the hearing, that Miles texted Brandon Miller and said, I need my joint, which is slang for a gun, and indicated maybe that somebody was, quote, faking, which, according to the Urban Dictionary, is making threats without the means to back it up. And so the detective testified that next, Brandon Miller returned to the area and that Darius Miles told Michael Davis where the gun was in Brandon Miller's backseat and indicated that there was a round in the chamber. And also, as far as Brandon Miller's involvement, the detective also testified that there were two cars blocking the roadway and that the Jeep in which the victims were wasn't able to leave because they were blocked in. Now, Jamia Harris's mother has previously told us that she felt that the blocking was intentional, but in court, they simply stated that the road was blocked by Jaden Bradley and Brandon Miller's vehicles. There was no mention of intent there. And also, Brandon Miller had a dash cam in his car, and some of that is being used as evidence in this case.
Yeah, and Carol, I want to follow up on that just as it relates to Brandon Miller, right, and his involvement here. You wrote a piece that's live on AL.com right now. Readers can go see it on the site. That says legal experts, you asked legal experts why Brandon Miller was not charged, right? And this was correct after Tuscaloosa Chief Deputy DA Paula Whitley said that there was nothing that they could charge him with according to the law. So what did legal experts tell you about why he hasn't been charged?
Right. And it's an obvious question because Darius Miles is charged with providing the gun to Michael Davis. So, I think your first thought and everybody's first thought was, Well, actually, Brandon Miller provided the gun to Darius Miles, who then provided it to Michael Davis. But that's not the case. The gun was in Miller's car, and Miles asked him to bring it back. And the key here is that, according to prosecutors, that Brandon Miller would have to have known that the gun was going to be used, in a crime. And there was no indication to Miller, according to experts and according to testimony, that he knew what Darius wanted the gun for.
Right. A question that we've also gotten from some readers, Carol, is about Brandon Miller's cooperation with investigators and whether or not that may have protected him from being charged at all. Is that something that you've heard?
Nothing that was brought up. That obviously has been discussed, and it has been said that he's been cooperative, but that was not something that was raised in the hearing, and not something that prosecutors would necessarily tell us.
John, I want to move to you. Fans out there might wonder how this could further interrupt Alabama's basketball season as the regular season winds down, with March Madness obviously on the horizon. Do you think that Brandon Miller will finish this season, or might he even face disciplinary action from Alabama as a result of this?
Yeah, I mean, all I can go off of is kind of what we know right now, and all of that points to him continuing to play. I think we've kind of talked about this maybe in an internal meeting, but I mean, to me, there's only two ways really that Brandon wouldn't play moving forward, and that's one would be if the public pressure got so strong that they felt like they had to relent and suspend him or bench him, whatever it might be. To this point, Alabama has shown no indication that they're going to do that. The other piece would be if that there was something in that hearing that came out that they had no knowledge of that completely changed the conversation. And at least based on what we've been told and what Nate Oates has said publicly, all of this is information that they've known. So nothing has really changed. Now, certainly the public discourse around it has changed. The knowledge that now everybody has. There's been an incredible amount of backlash to Nate Oates' comments yesterday. That's changed it. But other than that, the situation is still it hasn't really changed dramatically since January 15th. And so I think we all believe Brandon Miller is going to continue to play. It's going to be talked about a lot. I'm sure he will be heckled and criticized by opposing fans. We'll see what happens tonight against South Carolina. But at least what we know right now, I think he's going to keep playing and continue to be an important person from a basketball standpoint for this Alabama team.
John, you mentioned some of the scrutiny that Nate Oates has received so far, both locally and nationally, for those initial comments saying that Brandon Miller was in the wrong place at the wrong time. He obviously later issued a statement that said he didn't mean to downplay what had happened and Miller's involvement. In your opinion, how do you think Oates has handled the situation thus far?
Not well. I think that it's one of those situations, and Carol knows this a lot too. I mean, some people are experts in their fields and maybe they're not as qualified to talk about other things. Nate Oates, when you talk to him about basketball, is really smart. He's candid. He's interesting. I think we've learned he maybe should not be commenting on a capital murder. It doesn't seem like he's been able to strike that right tone. It seemed like he tried to do it a little bit, but of course the quote that, just gotten a lot of attention is that Brandon Miller was at the wrong place at the wrong time. And, my feeling, at least, and I think other people's share a similar one, is that regardless as to whether he's going to be charged, and as Carol has well reported, he's not going to be unless something changes that we don't know about. But to say he was at the wrong place at the wrong time, to me, that feels like the victim was at the wrong place at the wrong time, not somebody who was maybe had an active role in it. So he's gotten a lot of criticism over those comments. I don't think that's going away. And I think beyond just the initial backlash we've seen so far, again, we have the SEC tournament coming up and also the NCAA tournament, and that will add, national reporters, people who are not covering Alabama on a daily basis into the mix. And I think Nate Oates is going to continue to get questions about how he's handled this situation and why ultimately he and Alabama are comfortable with playing Brandon Miller under the circumstances.
Yeah, John, Nate Oates has spoken publicly about this, but someone that we haven't heard from so far is Alabama Athletics Director Greg Byrne. And I think a lot of people are sort of anxiously awaiting on when he might speak on the matter. Why do you think he has yet to comment, and when do you think he might?
Well, I think it's seeing the reaction to what Nate Oates got, I could see Greg Byrne maybe not wanting to wade into those waters. It's not, it's a lot easier to celebrate positive things, and than it is to know you're going to face some real heat. We at AL.com have put in a request to talk to Greg Byrne. Haven't gotten an answer on that one yet. I'm curious to see if he will be at the game tonight at South Carolina. I think he probably will be, but I don't know that definitively. But yeah, I think there are a lot of questions for Greg about just, what did they know and when, and why were they comfortable playing Brandon and Jaden during this time frame? And finally, the one thing that I think has gotten discussion today and yesterday is that in the midst of all this, they gave Nate Oates a huge extension that makes him one of the highest paid coaches in America, millions and millions of dollars. And I think people are wondering, with all this happening, and I know that coaches can't control everything, but this is a major scandal in college basketball, pretty much unprecedented for an active basketball player to be involved in a capital murder during a basketball season. So comparing that with Oates getting a massive extension, there's some questions around that.
Yeah, certainly. And that was going to be my last question for you, John. With what we know now, what are your lingering questions about the situation as it pertains to the Alabama program specifically?
Yeah, I think certainly the stuff that Carol's covered from a legal standpoint, I think there's questions around that, which I think at AL.com we're going to try to answer as best as possible. But yeah, beyond that, I think the number one is just who knew what when, and just ultimately, again, why is Alabama okay with what's played out? And I think that we have seen, as somebody who's covered college sports for a long time, like, people get suspended and not play for all kinds of different reasons. You miss a class, you can get suspended. You miss a test, you get suspended. So the standard in college sports has never been legally getting charged of a crime is the only reason you get suspended. So I think that there's some room for discussion around why they've been so comfortable playing this person involved in the situation. And that's something that I think, whether it's Nate Oates, Greg Byrne, University President Stuart Bell, whatever that combination you want, I think they're going to be asked that, and they're going to have to answer it at some point.
Yeah, and Carol, I want to end on this. You reported that Tuscaloosa County District Judge Joanne Janik ruled that there is enough evidence against Miles and Davis to send the case to a grand jury for indictment consideration, and that the judge also denied their request for bond. So at this point now, what is the next step in the process?
Sure. The next step will be that the evidence, most of what we heard yesterday will be presented to a grand jury. The grand jury process is secret. We won't know when that happens, and we won't know what testimony was presented. The next step, if the grand jury chooses to indict, then we will be made aware of the indictments being issued. And following indictments, then it will go on to trial. It will start moving its way through the judicial system, and that could take years.
Yeah, well, we still have a lot to learn about this as it all plays out in court. But until then, you can get every update on AL.com. You can follow Carol Robinson on Twitter, John Talty on Twitter as well. Carol Robinson and John Talty, thank you so much for the time. We really appreciate it.
Thanks, Ben.
Thanks.